everyone, and welcome to today's Support Coordinator webinar, proudly brought to you by Endeavour Foundation. I'm Vicky Gray, your host for today's session. This month, we delve into service agreements, safeguarding a participant's right to choice and control, with our guest presenter, Mary Ingerton from Support Coordination Academy. As we gather online with attendees joining us from across Australia, I'd like to acknowledge the significance of the lands we all call home. If you'd like to honour the traditional custodians of the lands you're logging in from, feel free to share their name in the chat. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gubbi Gubbi people, traditional custodians of the land on which I am hosting from today. In the spirit of reconciliation, Endeavour Foundation acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Now, a quick note on housekeeping. Your microphones and cameras will stay off, but we'd love for you to join the discussion in the chat. If you have any questions for our presenters, pop them in the Q&A section and we'll answer them after the presentation. You'll also find a link to our privacy policy in the chat, so feel free to reach out if you have any questions about that. Now, before I introduce our speakers, we'd love to get your thoughts on which topics we should cover next. If you can please take a look and complete the poll on your screen, this will help guide us to deliver the type of topics that you're interested in. Also, if there's a topic you'd like us to cover outside of these options, or a challenge you'd like help navigating, feel free to drop your ideas in the chat. Now, as mentioned earlier, during this webinar, we're going to dive into the topic of service agreements, safeguarding a participant's right to choice and control. Our presenter today is Mary Ingerton from Support Coordination Academy. But before handing you over to Mary, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Shania Brennan. Shania is Endeavour Foundation's Business Improvement Specialist, leading a team of social workers and disability specialists who advocate for our clients. With qualifications in psychology, HR management and social work, plus 8 years in the community sector, she's passionate about empowering vulnerable people with choice and control. Over to you, Shania.
Hi, everyone. All right. So thank you, Vicky. And hello, everyone. As always, it is wonderful to be here with you all today. As Vicky mentioned, I do work with Endeavour Foundation and I do lead teams that advocate for people with disabilities, both in the change of circumstance space and in the intake or onboarding space. So as you know, today we'll be discussing service agreements and safeguarding a participant's right to choice and control. So today I'm here to give you a really brief snapshot on how Endeavour Foundation supports people or participants in this space and what you might be able to expect. So service agreements are a key part of service provisions with Endeavour, and we value transparency, and particularly when we're talking about service provisions. A service agreement with Endeavour encapsulates a variety of different forms of agreements, which you can see at the bottom of this slide here. We've got the overall service agreement. We also have privacy and consent forms, cancellation policies and quotes for support for the participants. And these also may be known as programs of support or schedule of supports. And in the instance of a participant engaging in self-services, you might also expect an accommodation or board agreement if it's applicable or relevant. So I thought I would share a really quick example of what you could expect around these service agreements. So I thought I would use the example of you having a participant that is joining one of our learning and lifestyle hubs in particular. And so once they have kind of progressed, the participants progress through the intake process, everything's all approved, and they're getting ready to commence, what you could expect is a welcome email that welcomes your participant participant and yourselves to Endeavour. And in that email, you will find some documents that are attached and some directions around completing them and returning them. And so some of those attachments would be the service agreement, the cancellation policy, a quote, a finalised quote of the support that's been discussed throughout the intake process, and that would be for your review and signatures, and the participant or their delegates' signatures, I should say. That is a really, really super quick snapshot of how we approach service agreements. Mary is going to go into it in so much more detail in just a few moments. And Cece, if you want to jump over to the next slide, thank you. Before I do hand over, I would like to just give you a really, really quick snapshot of the supports that Endeavour has for people with disability. So as you can see on the screen, we've got a few different types of supports, and those are around employment pathways, helping people build skills and confidence. So the sorry, I just can't see the screen. There it is. In supported employment, supported hosted employment, and mainstream employment. We have the home and living, supported home and living options, which are tailored to individual needs. And those include our supported independent living, our specialist disability accommodation or SDA, ILO or independent living options, and also in-home supports for people that have their own home and require drop-in supports. And then we've also got our community services that help people learn, connect and grow and do more of what they love. And we can see that is the learning and lifestyle hubs, our Thrive Learning, and our social and community participation. If you'd like to learn more, just complete the form that has been popped into the chat, and somebody from my team will be in touch to talk further. So now I'm going to hand over to Mary, who will take us through the rest of today's discussion. Thank you, Mary.
Hi guys, how's everyone going? Just having a few technical issues. Okay, I'm hoping the PowerPoint's working because I don't actually have control over, I can't take control of it. So I'm just using the thing down the bottom. So can everyone see the new PowerPoint? Is that working? PowerPoint's moving along. Can you just give me a thumbs up? That'd be great. Yep, awesome. Thanks very much. Okay, so I'm Mary from Support Coordination. Thanks guys, that's just brilliant. So today, what we're going to be talking about, okay, let's have a look. So we're going to talk about service agreements, safeguarding participants' right to choice and control. So this is actually a topic that someone requested, or we've had requests for. So we've kind of dived into this a bit further. So what we're going to talk about today is, okay, so we're going to be looking at service agreements, setting up those expectations and safeguards around participants' rights. We're going to be looking at actions a support coordinator needs to take to negotiate service agreements effectively, how support coordinators can assist a participant to make informed choices about their supports and services, and then how to balance duty of care and dignity of risk when supporting a participant to access and participate those supports and services. So it's quite a lot of information. So I'm going to keep talking. Hopefully I'll be able to get through it all. And then please put your questions into the Q&A because we do try and make some time at the end to answer any questions. And also just to note, when I actually talk about a participant, it's a general term that I'm referring to. So I'm also referring to anyone who might be acting on that person's behalf. So it could be the person themselves, it could be a nominee, it could be a family member, whoever that might be. Okay, so let's get started. So thinking about clear agreements and setting up expectations and safeguarding rights. So service agreements, as we know, are foundational element of working within the NDIS. So they're not just administrative paperwork, they're essential tools for ensuring services are effective, person-centred and rights-based. So I suppose it's a bit of contentious thing, I suppose, because under the NDIS, when you have a look on the NDIS website, there's nothing that says that service agreements are mandatory. It's more about service agreements are best practice and absolutely recommended. And throughout our training with Support Coordination Academy, we always say, as a support coordinator, you need something in writing, evidence-based, best practice around what the agreement is. And so generally within the NDIS, we call these service agreements. Okay, so for some supports, obviously, they are mandatory, but the NDIS has not come out clearly around service agreements. And that's because they see it as a formalised contract, which service agreements are just that, agreements around how services are going to be provided. But let's have a look more deep dive into service agreements and why they're so important. So service agreements clarify expectations. So when service agreements clearly define what services will be delivered, by whom, when, where, and what cost. They help avoid misunderstandings by setting out agreed roles, responsibilities, and deliverables, and they ensure both the participant and the provider are aligned and agree on the purpose and scope of the support to be provided. They promote transparency and accountability because they outline each party's rights, obligations, and service standards, helping build that trust in relation to the services that are going to be delivered. They create a formal reference point. So if issues or complaints arrive or making disputes, there's a structured and fairer process to follow. It also encourages providers to act ethically and consistently in line with the NDIS practice standards. They also support participant choice and control. So it empowers a participant to make informed decisions about who supports them and how. Service agreements often reflect a participant's preferences, goals, values, and reinforce their autonomy. They also allow participants to review, negotiate, or exit from services that are no longer meeting their needs, which is really, really important. Service agreements are a practical tool that supports safety, quality, and respect in the delivery of NDI services. And support coordinators use because they assist participants to negotiate appropriate service agreements, and it enhances that safeguarding role, which is a fundamental part of the support coordinator role. So when we think about safeguards, they include things like protecting participant rights. So service agreements embed participants' rights into the delivery of the supports. So they often include explicit references to privacy and confidentiality, ensuring personal information is handled appropriately, dignity and respect, reflecting person-centred practice, complaints and feedback mechanisms, so that participants know how to raise concerns or request changes. And these rights are grounded in the NDIS quality and safeguarding frameworks, which aims to ensure that people with disability are safe and treated fairly across all supports and services. They ensure compliance with NDIS practice standards. So NDIS practice standards require providers to deliver services that are individualised, safe and accountable. So a service agreement provides a record of what was agreed to, and it's a way to ensure to hold providers accountable to the commitments that they've made. So it's around the service scope and frequency, the cost and budgets aligned, and the outcomes related to a participant's NDIS plan goals. And it's something that I talk to our support coordinators about all the time. When you are negotiating or supporting a participant to negotiate service agreements, I always include what are the participants' goals? What are we actually working towards? What is something that we can measure progress against? And what are the outcomes that we're looking for? So it really helps to bed down and give some clarity around the outcomes related to the participants' goals. So it's not just a service agreement to say, here's a support, here's a service I'm going to provide, but what does it relate to? How does that relate back to the person's goals? And what are the outcomes that we're working towards? So it helps the support coordinator to monitor progress and performance, and it allows participants and support coordinators to identify when services are not being delivered as promised. That's really, really important. So service agreements are also a safeguard in relation to mitigating risk. So by clearly documenting what will and won't be delivered, service agreements reduce the likelihood of under delivery of support, so fewer hours than what's been paid for, and also charging for hours that haven't been delivered. and unethical practices such as high pressure tactics or vague service descriptions. And also another thing to be aware of is automatically rolling over service agreements without consent from a participant. So making sure service agreements align with a participant's NDIS plan. So service agreements also outline things like cancellation terms. They should outline exit processes. What is the time frame? What is the process? Any dispute resolution pathway. So if a participant doesn't agree, how do they make a complaint? How do they go through that dispute process? These are all crucial protections if the relationship breaks down or needs to change. Okay. And lastly, they provide a foundation for informed decision making. So a written agreement empowers participants to ask questions, seek clarification, or compare services from other providers and provide a participant with greater control over their plan and budgets, making it easy to spot irregularities or request changes when their needs evolve. Okay, let's hope this still works. Fantastic. Okay, so how can a support coordinator negotiate service agreements effectively? Support coordinators are not legal representatives or decision makers. They are key facilitators in ensuring that a service agreement reflects the participant's needs, their goals, and their rights. So a support coordinator's role is to guide and support, not decide. So it's guiding and supporting while assisting a participant to create that strong ethical partnership between the participant and the provider. So how do they facilitate this process? The first thing is about preparing a participant. So before any service agreement is signed, a support coordinator needs to explore the participant's needs, goals, and service preferences in relation to the supports that they're looking for. So what kind of support are they looking for? What outcomes are they hoping to achieve? Supporting a participant to understand what good support looks like. So really doing that problem solving with the participant. So if these are the outcomes that you're hoping to achieve, what would good service look like? Really building their capacity to really have an insight and understand, so that when things don't go the way that they want, really helping them to reflect on, well, maybe that wasn't really a good service. Maybe I need to go back and have a think about what that support needs to look like for me. But also explaining the purpose of a service agreement in clear, accessible language, reinforcing that it protects their rights and sets boundaries of how the provider has agreed to provide that service and support. Checking for informed consent and decision-making support, so ensuring the participant has capacity to understand the agreement, or a participant needs access to support persons or a formal advocate or an interpreter to help them understand what the agreement means. So that's really preparing a participant first. The next thing is really supporting good communication between the participant and the provider. So the good communication is central to setting up a successful service agreement arrangement. Supporting good communication between a participant and provider can look really different in a number of different situations, but it's really thinking about how do we set up that good communication. So these are just some strategies. So organising an introductory meeting between the participant and the provider, ensuring the participant feels supported and has capacity for that informed decision making. Could be facilitating conversations around expectations, so both parties are clear on what is realistic and what's not realistic. Clarifying and translating complex or technical language used in agreements into plain English, or supporting a participant, or talking with a provider around providing plain English, or having some really a better way to actually explain to a participant what that actually means. So breaking it down into more simplistic language, because the biggest thing is that I find when I'm working with participants in relation to negotiating service agreements, or I always look at other service providers' agreements, is really going back to the provider and going, this is a 30-page agreement. It's not realistic for a participant to be able to read that and understand what it means. How can we make this more accessible for the participants so they actually understand what's going on? Balancing provider and participant needs. So the support coordinator acts as a neutral intermediary who ensures the agreement is fair and achievable. So a support coordinator's role is to ensure there is a balance between the influence of providers and ensuring a participant's needs are met. So making sure that there's no overpower or power imbalance in relation to the negotiation around the agreement. So support coordinators do this by requesting support providers outline clear and measurable deliverables that can be realistically be delivered within the budget, the time frame, and the goals of the participants' NDIS plan. And support coordinators often push back on vague or overly ambiguous commitments that may set the participant up for disappointments or conflicts later. And it's kind of what I was just talking about before. Ensuring that the services match the participant's current needs, not just what the provider can offer. So often thinking about the supports and services that are being delivered and thinking about, once you've done that preparation and that planning, you have a really good idea around the participant support needs. So if you're seeing things in service agreements that don't really fit or don't really match, going back and pushing back about that with the service provider and going, how is that actually going to happen? Because these are the barriers that the participant faces and it doesn't quite actually fit. And then supporting a participant to really advocate for fair terms. So supporting a participant to understand and review cancellation terms, checking notice periods and exit clauses, setting up interim, maybe sometimes it's about setting up interim agreements, especially if the participant is trying a new service provider or service. And then identifying any red flags. So raising any concerns or negotiating changes on behalf of the participant with their consent. Okay. Right. So what does a support coordinator need to consider? So when you're working with a participant and you're looking at negotiating service agreements, what are some of the things that you need to consider? So participant capacity and preferences. So does the participant understand the agreement and what they're agreeing to? Are they confident and comfortable with the provider's communication style and approach? And does the agreement reflect the participant's cultural, language, or accessibility needs? Thinking about the plan budget and funding categories. So are the services being proposed consistent with the types of funding in the participant's plan? Will the total cost of services fit within the participant's plan budget and leave room for other need supports? Are the supports priced at or below the NDIS price limits? And has the provider clearly detailed the funding amount, the funding categories, and the funding periods in a schedule of supports? Alignment with the participant's goals. So do the services directly support the participant to achieve the goals in the NDIS plan? Can the provider demonstrate how their support contributes to outcomes like increased independence, skill development, or community inclusion? Thinking about provider suitability. So is the provider reputable, experienced, and operating in line with NDIS values and the NDIS Code of Conduct? Do they have appropriate complaint, incident, and feedback processes? Thinking about ongoing monitoring and review, which is incredibly important when we are supporting participants. So you get to that, you're implementing, done the negotiation, the service agreements in place, thinking about that ongoing monitoring and review processes. So scheduling regular check-ins to ensure the services are meeting the participants' expectations. Encouraging a review of the service agreement at set intervals. So that's generally in line with the participant's NDIS plan. But if you are supporting a participant to access a new provider, there might be an interim agreement for like 6 months. And you might be going, right, let's come back in a 6-month period and review how the support's going. Be alert to signs that a provider isn't delivering on the agreement and take actions as required. Okay. I know this is a lot of information. Okay, the other thing is we will be writing a blog about this, so a lot of this detail will be in the blog. Helping participants choose the right providers. So this is really around informed choices. So again, supporting participants as a support coordinator, supporting participants to make informed decisions is again another part of our safeguarding role, and it's fundamental part of our role as support coordinators. So it aligns with the NDIS core principles around choice and control, empowering participants to actively shape their lives and access a service that best meet their needs. So again, a support coordinator's role is to act as a neutral but knowledgeable guide, helping participants to explore the options, understand their rights, and make confident decisions that are aligned with their goals and values. So how can a support coordinator assist a participant to make informed decisions? Understanding the participant's needs, goals, and preferences. So you can see that there's a common pattern that we're coming back to. So beginning with a person-centered conversation to understand the participant's goals, support needs, priorities, cultural background, identities, and values, preferences and how and by whom they want their supports delivered, exploring what matters most to them. And this is the most important part of when we first start working with participants or we're negotiating new services, coming back to this every single time. The more time you put into this process, everything else just flows. So understanding communication styles, flexibility in scheduling, when, where, why, how, when does it need to happen, what does it need to look like, but also language and accessibility requirements are really, really important. So providing a range of suitable options is incredibly important, especially around managing conflict of interest. So support coordinators need to offer multiple provider options when they're available, avoiding recommendations that appear biased or limited. So really referring back to that conflict of interest, especially if you are support coordinator working in an organisation that provides other services, having those systems and processes in place to manage that conflict of interest. So support coordinators use their local knowledge, like service. So you research provider directories, we tap into our networks, we have often provider libraries. And so really drilling back down to that person-centered planning, understanding what that support needs to look like really drives our researching and what we're looking for. Thinking about translating complex information into accessible formats. So breaking down provider information, service agreement, pricing structures, all that kind of thing for participants so that they really understand the services and the supports and what they look like. Facilitating direct contact and first impressions. So helping the participant to connect directly with short list of providers. So after a participant, you've supported a participant to really have some choice around a number of providers, looked at the pros and cons, do they fit, do they don't fit, what works really well for you, what are the ones that are really appealing to you. And then once a participant has chosen that provider, then how do you facilitate that contact? So again, is it arranging meets and greets? Is it around introductory calls? Is it around, virtual meetings? Is it around supporting a participant to then contact that provider and organise that themselves? So building that capacity themselves. But again, it's really building the capacity of a participant to know what questions to ask. So supporting a participant around things like, so how were you asking a provider? Things like, how will you help me reach my goals? How will we revise how we're working towards those goals or any outcomes that we're achieving? So what happens if my needs need to change? Or what is your approach to communication and feedback? So will I have a contact person? Or do we have a direct line that I can contact? Also explaining rights, responsibilities and safeguards. So ensuring that a participant is aware around their right to choose, change or end services, their right to safe, respectful and responsible supports, but also the rights to make complaints without fear or retribution. Okay, and then encouraging reflection and decision making. So really guiding a participant through a structured decision-making process, especially if they're feeling overwhelmed or unsure. Sometimes I've been working with a participant and their support needs are so unique and so specific. There's often only one or two providers that are available at most. And I'm not living in a rural area. So it's really then drilling that down, but also again, discussing those pros and cons, helping them to develop a short list, reinforcing what's important to them, and then supporting them. How do we lock that in? What are the next steps? So again, what are some of the things that a support coordinator needs to consider? Participant capacity and consent. So does the participant fully have capacity to make those choices? Do they need supported decision making? Are there other families, carers, nominees, guardians, or advocates involved? And then how can you support that dignity of your risk while ensuring participant safety? Provider suitability and fit. So does the provider have the right skills and experience? Really, really important. Are they experienced in working with the participant's disability type or age group? Do they demonstrate cultural competence like trauma-informed practice and respect for diversity? And do they respond promptly? So what is that, again, that communication? Thinking about that NDIS plan and budget, are they aligned with so the supports that they're able to provide in the service agreement, the schedule of supports, have they got the right funding categories, the funding periods, are they within budgets, and again, thinking about what other supports are needed. Service availability and flexibility. I think this is one of the biggest challenges that we have within the market at the moment. When can the provider start? And when are they needed? And do they have a long wait list? And if they do, how do we manage that? Are there other supports that we need to be working with the participant to put in place in the meantime? We need to be flagging that as a risk. Is it a risk? It's clearly a barrier. Is it a risk for the participant? And what strategies we're going to put in place to manage that risk? Okay. Thinking about transparency and communication. Thinking about, is a provider open about how they operate? So what does that communication look like around the supports and services? Are they willing for the person to go there? Are they willing to sit down and have that communication around what the service looks like and supports look like? And is the service provider willing to adjust any of the services to, if you've got a participant with very unique support needs? And thinking about, again, that empowerment over influence. Supporting the participants to make informed choices is not about steering them towards the best provider. It's about empowering them to ask the right questions, recognise their rights, and take control of their plan and their future support needs. Okay, thinking about duty of care and dignity of risk. Okay, just keeping an eye on the time. So, balancing duty of care and dignity of your risk is one of the most important things and often complex situations that we deal with in relation to the support coordinator role. So it involves protecting a participant's right to make decisions, even if they're risky ones, while also upholding legal and ethical obligations to ensure their safety, wellbeing and rights. And it's often a very complex and challenging balance. So thinking about duty of care. So duty of care is a legal or ethical obligation to act in ways that do not cause harm and to take reasonable steps to protect people from foreseeable risk. Dignity of risk means that the rights of all people, including those with disability, to make their own choices, including choices that involve risk as part of living an autonomous and fulfilling life. So just like everybody else, we make risks every single day. People with disability have the right to make risks. Our role as a support coordinator is to ensure that there's safeguards in place so that they can do that safely. So how can a support coordinator facilitate this balance? Okay. So again, facilitating that person-centered practice. We keep coming back to the same things. Getting to know the participants' values, goals, strengths, and fears. Yeah. Understanding what dignity means to that person. What are they willing to risk in order to gain independence, freedom, or quality of life? What does that actually look like to them, and what does that mean to them? Ensuring planning decisions reflect the participant's voice and not making assumptions about what's safe or appropriate for that person. Using supported decision-making principles. Thank you for that thumbs up. Recognising that all people, regardless of their disability, have the right to make decisions with appropriate support. So if their capacity is limited, enable decision-making through accessible information, Giving the person time and space to consider options, to think through, and making sure that they have that a family or an advocate or someone that they trust to help them to process that information and make sure that they understand so that they can make those informed decisions. And making sure that we respect that unwise decisions does not essentially equal lack of capacity. So participants have the right to take risks as a part of learning, growing, and exercising control over their lives. So identifying and managing risk collaboratively, which is incredibly important. Sometimes I've worked with support coordinators of saying, well, the person doesn't really have the capacity to make these decisions. So I'm saying to them, it's not our role to make decisions for participants. How do we facilitate that choice and control and informed decision making? What are the strategies? What are the support networks and links that we need to be putting in place to support that person to have that choice and control? So facilitating open discussions about potential risks and consequences. It's often a really difficult conversation to have, but it's a conversation that we need to have because we need to be transparent and accountable ourselves. So if we are identifying risks, we need to be transparent and accountable with the person that we're supporting so that they are really, really clear about the conversations that we're having. So helping a participant to understand, so it's really that realistic or that problem solving that we kind of go when someone's talking about a situation or they're talking about support that they want to do or something that they want to do, really helping them to gain insight and to be able to problem solve themselves. So thinking about, well, what could go wrong? What would that look like if that happened? And then what would it look like if it went wrong? Or what do you think? What would it look like if it went really well? How likely is it that something could happen? And maybe what are some supports or safeguards that we could put in place to help reduce the risk? What would that look like for you? Or what would you be agreeable to? And it's really empowering that person to have that dignity of risk. So then we kind of move from that scale of a dignity of risk. So if you think about dignity of risks on the left-hand side of a scale, you're working towards that duty of care. Yeah, more higher likelihood and incidences of a risk occurring. So when these risks are evident, so often with a dignity of risk, when you're supporting someone to work through and problem solve, we generally document those within our case notes. Yeah, we had those conversations, these are the strategies, this is what we've agreed upon, these are the safeguards we're going to be putting in place. When you're looking at more severe risks or higher incidence and likelihood of risks occurring, support coordinators need to be doing risk assessments and risk management plans, clearly identifying the participant's choices and the impact of those choices on the participant, discussing any identified risks with the participant and their support network. So that would be the family, so all those informal supports, or the support network. So it could be allied health, might be linked in, it could be mainstream providers, whoever's linked in with that participant, really discussing that with that support network around, these are the risks that we've identified. Let's sit down and have a conversation about what that looks like for everyone, drawing on that expertise and that knowledge within that support network, and then coming up with really good strategies about how to reduce the likelihood or the impact of that risk if it occurs. Documenting decisions and rationale. So keeping clear factual records of the discussions about risks and choices, who is involved in the decision making, and what steps were taken to support safe risk taking. And again, if it's a dignity of risk, we're really looking at our case notes. If we're looking at more high level risk, then we're looking at our case notes, of course, but also documenting them in a risk assessment and risk management plan. Okay, knowing when to escalate. Really, really important. So all of these processes need to be documented in our risk management policies and procedures that everybody needs to have on board. So how do they work? What processes? When do we need to take action? How do we need to take action? What does it need to look like? So knowing when to escalate. So if a situation poses a serious imminent risk to the participant or others, support coordinators have a duty of care to raise a concern under the mandatory reporting obligations involving the It's a participant support network to collaborate and identify appropriate risk management strategies. So those complex case review meetings, bringing those stakeholders together, making sure the participant is aware what's happening, having those discussions. What does it look like for you? These are my concerns, drawing on that expertise. Involving relevant professionals in emergency services and seeking guidance from supervisors and completing an incident report if required. Even in these cases, making sure we involve the participant where possible and deciding next steps. Yeah? So what does the support coordinator need to consider? I've nearly finished. Okay. Okay, so what do we need to consider? A participant's will and preferences. So are you basing your actions on what the participant wants, not what others think is best for them? Have you explored options with them in a non-coercive and inclusive way? So that person-centered approach. Levels of risk and its impact. So is the risk real and serious or just uncomfortable and unfamiliar? Is the participant aware of the consequences and accepting of them? Have you had that conversation? Have we had that discussion around, well, what would that look like? And how would that feel for you? And if it did go wrong, then what? So really having that conversation and helping the person to build their capacity to really problem solve around that. Not support coordinators making that decision for them. So capacity and support needs. Does the participant understand the decision and its potential outcomes? And do they need extra support to make informed choices? Least restrictive alternatives. Are there less restrictive ways to reduce risk while still honouring the participant's autonomy? Really, really important. We need to be thinking outside the box. We need to be thinking early on. Okay, so this is a bit of a red flag, or it's something that I'm really kind of thinking about. This is a risk. Well, you've identified a risk, and then you're really talking to the participant, talking through with them and their support network. Have you avoided protecting someone in a way that limits their rights unnecessarily? Okay. Really important things to consider. And our role and boundaries. Are we stepping outside our role into a substitute decision-making role? Who do we need to involve? So I suppose one thing that I find when I talk with support coordinators about managing risks, sometimes support coordinators have said to me, you know, I'm really stressed because I've got all this risk that I'm managing. And I'm saying, well, it's not our responsibility. It's not our responsibility to manage and hold on to ongoing risk. It's our role. Our role is to build a resilient network of supports that supports that participant. We work collaboratively to work together. What does that risk look like? Who's the best person to manage that risk, but also take responsibility putting those strategies in place? Is it an occupational therapist? Is it a psychologist? Is it the adult guardian? Is it a family member? So making sure we work collaboratively with that support network so that we can all manage and work together to manage and put those strategies in place. So dignity of risk doesn't mean turning a blind eye to danger. It means remembering that safety isn't the only goal. Freedom, self-direction, and the opportunity to learn from life are just important. I think that's a really important statement. So as a support coordinator, our role isn't to shield participants from every challenges, but to offer support and then putting safeguards in place so that participants can make those choices and decisions safely. Okay, so being transparent, open, and reflective in our practice helps us to hold that balance between dignity of risk and duty of care. So when I talk about reflective in our practice, it's about stepping back and going, could I have done that differently? coming out of stakeholder meetings, you know, did we discuss everything that we needed to discuss? How could I have done that differently? Getting training, especially when you are working with participants with a disability that you don't understand, or if you don't understand trauma-informed practice, getting specific training around that. So really being reflective of what we're doing and constantly learning. So balancing duty of care with dignity of risk is an essential part of ethical, person-centered support coordination practice. Okay, I've gone a bit over time, so we're going to move on to Q&As. I know that's a lot of information, but we do also, again, this is a recording, so you can go back and watch it. We also do, I also write a blog for Endeavour, so you'll be able to go and get access to that as well. Okay. Q&A. Let's see if this is going to work. Okay, so I've been told to go to the bottom. Okay, just trying to go to the bottom. Keeps resetting. Okay, here we go. How can we handle a situation where a participant has requested supports that are outside the budget and subsequently signed a service agreement for these supports? I have informed the participant that they will run out of funding before the end of the plan and expressed numerous times that running out of funding is not something that will be accepted by the NDA as a reason for review. They're aware but keep saying that they have done it before and aren't worried. Okay. It's an interesting situation, Jenny, because again, participants have choice and control. We can't make them do what they don't want to do, just like no one can make us do what we don't want to do. If a participant has requested supports that are outside the budget, then, so for the requested supports that are outside the intent of the NDIS plan, the funding that's been allocated on their budget, then they're at risk of being investigated around fraud. I'm taking that to the extreme. If they've subsequently signed a service agreement for these supports, then I would be seriously talking to the service provider around, do you understand that you're running a risk of not being paid for these supports? So, and if they continue to go down this path, then that is their choice. It's a really challenging situation, but as a support coordinator, that's where our safeguarding role comes in. So I would say that this is a situation that's actually been set up before you've come on board. So then it's a situation that I've dealt with before myself, and I've had a very clear conversations with the participant and the service provider, and have been very clear around the risks of continuing to provide the support, the lack of payment, the lack of any complaints being made around fraudulent use of NDIS funds. So, and again, it's really about saying, how can we resolve this situation? What do we need to do? But I find I've been in a couple of those situations when I've taken over from other support coordinators. Okay, we've got some comments on here. I still have providers getting participants to sign who are unable to make informed decisions and not including their plan nominee. I would be making a formalised complaint. Guardians, trustees, plan nominees can sign or represent that participant. Well done, Isabella. If you are working with a participant and a service provider is going directly to a participant and not including you as part of that process, or refusing to include you as part of that process, and you feel that the participant has been taken advantage of, then I would be lodging a complaint. I would be talking to the provider around your concerns. I'd be talking to the participant around their concerns. And if nothing is changing and you're really still concerned about that support provision, I would be lodging a complaint with the NDIS Quality and Safeguard Commission. But also I would be talking to the nominee, if there's a guardian involved. Are you aware of this situation? Are you aware that this is actually happening? Okay. Again, it's part of our safeguarding role as support coordinators, which is why service agreements are so important. Okay. Do you have a service agreement template that we can share with a provider who is new and has no idea on how to draw up a service agreement outlining? Refer them to the blog. Look, there's a lot of information on the NDIS website that clearly says what needs to be included within a service agreement. If you're working with a service provider, look, I often get asked for service agreement templates, but they need to be unique and designed based on that service that's been provided and are based on that organisation's values and responsibilities and what they're actually offering. So it's hard to give it a template around that. The NDIS gives a guide around it, and there's some pretty standardized things that need to be included. If you're working with a service provider who doesn't know what they're doing, can you link them in with another service provider that provides a similar service and they can talk to them about it? That's probably the best thing that I can offer. What should you do with a participant who has capacity refusing to sign a service agreement? And if they won't sign, would you still continue with this? Absolutely not continue with the service. So a service agreement needs to be agreeable between the participant and a provider. So if a participant is refusing to sign a service agreement, and I've had this before, I've talked to the participant around the importance of a service agreement, why we need it in place, and it's around risk management of the service and being able to be very clear about who's providing what service. I would also be trying to understand why is it that they're refusing to sign it? What is that about? What's the underlying reason for that? And really working with them around that. I have talked to a provider around I would not be comfortable in continuing to provide the service. If you don't have a service agreement and a participant won't sign it, then how do you know that the person's agreed to that actual service being provided? Because the risk is that the service gets provided and then the participant refuses to pay for the support. So I would be really doing a lot more deep dive into the reason why they're refusing to sign the agreement. Should all the goals on the NDIS plan go into the service agreement as shown in comment? Perhaps only the goal that aligns. Well done, Joe. I would only be aligning the goals that's relevant to the service being provided. Yeah. And then really talking to the service provider and the participant about, well, this is the goal. What does that actually mean to you, and what would the outcome look like? How is the support assisting you to pursue or achieve this goal? What would that look like? Because it gives you something to measure against. Okay. I'll probably do a couple more. I've recently had a provider send an invoice to a plan manager that the participant rejected on multiple occasions. There has been a breakdown in communication. Okay, this is really big. Okay, provider said they're going to report the participant to the NDIA. Participant did not sign a service agreement. He just signed an intake form which did not outline any costs and terms. Okay, this is a classic example of why we need to have a clear agreement before any supports and services are put in place. Okay, so will the provider just have to write it off as bad debt? It's up to the provider. They need to be really talking to the NDIA about that. They can put a complaint in about the participant to the NDI, the Quality and Safeguard Commission. It's very, very complex. But again, this is a classic example about the question that was asked before. What happens if the participant doesn't comply with the service agreement after it's signed? That's why we have service agreements. It's why we have, what are your responsibilities? What are my responsibilities? What are the conditions around cancellation of the service agreement? So again, all of this should be written within the service agreement. If a participant doesn't hold up their end of the agreement, then a service agreement a provider has a right to withdraw their services. But there needs to be negotiation, and there needs to be conversations around, well, why are you not complying? What does that actually look like? Why is that happening? That's our coaching, that's our reviewing and checking in to make sure services are still meeting that person's support needs. Okay. Some of my participants choose sole traders, unregistered providers, gardening, cleaning, refuse and new for service agreements under choice of control. Okay. Look, I've had participants, I've worked with participants who, and this will be the last one that I'll answer, but I've had participants that they've had cleaners come in, or they've had garden maintenance, people who have had nothing to do with the NDIS before, and they're unregistered providers. And so how I've worked with it, and those providers are going, look, why would I need to draw up a service agreement that's nothing that I use for all my other people that I support? So we don't do a formalized service agreement, but we definitely put something in writing. So I say to them, I'm going to put up together in a bit of an email, very clearly outline, these are your responsibilities, this is what you've agreed to, this is the service, this is how often, what the cost is, everything that would be in a service agreement. I literally put it in an email, and or I put it into a Word document, and then I make sure that the participant is happy with it in an email, and then I make sure that the person comes back by email and formalizes, say, I accept these conditions, this is what it is. Most of the time, people will have something in writing, but again, every single support and service that goes in place, whether it's an independent support worker, whether it's a cleaner or a gardener, anyone who's unregistered, always insist in something in writing, confirming what those supports and services will look like. Love your point, Michaela. Amazing info, but how do we facilitate all of this within such tight budgets? I totally agree. Totally agree. I just wish that the way support coordination was funded, that we had adequate hours so that we could really implement all of this really good person-centered quality practice, because unfortunately we don't get the hours what we need. Look, guys, I've got to go. Happy for Endeavour to send me questions and I can respond to them. Do you want to take over, Vicky?
Yes, I'm just coming back on now. So yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, all good. I just wanted to just say exactly what Mary just said. With the unanswered questions that we've got, we'll have a look over those and provide you with the answers and some other resources over the coming days. Yeah, so anyway, Mary, thank you so much again for another amazing session. There are some great comments from attendees who really enjoyed the session today. So thank you again for putting so much information into this. I know you are just an absolute, I don't know, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but you're brilliant at it. As Shania mentioned earlier, if you have clients looking for supported employment opportunities or home and living services or community support services, please reach out to our friendly team using the form that we're going to drop in the chat, I think, shortly. And then tomorrow you'll also get an email with the recording of today's session and a PDF of the presentation. I know a few of you have been asking for that, so please be sure to check your inbox. Okay, so we'd love to invite you to join us next month in August. Our next webinar, the NDIS legislation changes, securing support for additional impairments, is on Tuesday, the 12th of August. At the same time from 12 to 1 AEST. So yeah, make sure that you register for that one. But before we go, we just shared the link to all our support coordinator webinar recordings on YouTube as well. So don't forget to subscribe so that you know when the new videos are uploaded and they're ready to be viewed. Again, so much information that Mary has that we've recorded for you guys, so you have that as an extra resource. And if you'd like to stay informed and support your clients even better, we've also dropped the link to our Care Connect newsletter in the chat. Sign up for valuable updates, insights and resources. Again, this gets delivered straight to your inbox so you can read it at your leisure. On behalf of Endeavour Foundation, I want to thank you for joining us today. We wish you a fantastic afternoon and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks again. Bye now.